Salvation wasn't free. It had a price tag. For centuries, religion didn't just shape souls, it shaped economies. Think about it. Every tithe, every indulgence, every cathedral was built on money-changing hands. From church taxes to forgiveness for sale, from towering cathedrals to bloody crusades. Faith moved fortunes. And when money collided with belief, entire nations changed forever. This is the untold story of the economics of religion. Religion has always had an economic side. We don't always think about it that way. But faith and money have been tied together for centuries. In medieval Europe, the church wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was a landowner. It was a tax collector. It was even a moneylender. Every farmer, every peasant, every family in the village was expected to pay something called a tithe. That meant 1/10, 10% of their harvest, 1/10 of their wheat, 1/10 of their wine, 1/10 of their livestock, and all of it went directly to the church. Think about that for a moment. If you were a poor farmer, already struggling to survive, the church still took its share, no exceptions. And over time, this made the church one of the largest landowners in Europe. Its barns were full of grain, its treasuries stacked with silver, its power built on the backs of ordinary people. Now here's the irony. Salvation was preached as free. The grace of God could not be bought. But in practice, it always came with a price tag. Every wedding had fees, every baptism had fees, every funeral had fees. And while prayers rose to heaven, wealth quietly flowed into the coffers of the church. This wasn't just faith, this was finance. And in many ways, the church was wealthier, more stable, and more powerful than the kings it claimed to bless. By the late Middle Ages, the church had a problem. It wasn't just about preaching or guiding souls anymore. It had become a global institution. It needed money, and lots of it. Why? To maintain its vast lands, to fund its armies, to build glorious cathedrals that touch the sky, to commission art and prove its power. So the church turned to a new idea: indulgences. An indulgence was essentially a spiritual shortcut. You paid money, and in return, you reduced your time in purgatory. You could even buy forgiveness for sins you hadn't committed yet. At first, indulgences were limited. The money was used for great projects, like the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But soon, indulgences became big business. Traveling preachers moved from town to town, selling salvation like a product. The moment the coin in the coffer rings, one famous preacher said, "The soul from purgatory springs." Imagine hearing that as a poor farmer. You've lost a child, you've lost a parent, and now you're told you can help save their soul with just a few coins. People gave what they had. They gave out of fear, they gave out of hope, and the church grew richer and richer. But indulgences also revealed a dangerous truth. When faith becomes business, corruption follows. Not everyone believed in the system. Some whispered that salvation couldn't be bought. Others raged at the greed they saw in Rome. And one day, a German monk named Martin Luther would hammer his 95 Theses to a church door. His message? Salvation comes from faith, not from fees. That act lit the spark for the Protestant Reformation. And it all began with the business of indulgences. The Crusades. To many, they sound like holy wars, blessed by the church, carried out by knights in shining armor. But behind the banners of faith, there was a very earthly question. Who was going to pay for it all? An army isn't free. It needs ships. It needs armor. It needs food, horses, weapons, supplies. And all of that costs money. A lot of money. So how did the church do it? Taxes. Special levies on nobles and peasants alike. Indulgences, sold as promises of eternal reward in exchange for coin. And loans, enormous loans, from wealthy merchants and banking families. The Crusades became one of the largest financial projects of the Middle Ages. For knights, the pitch was simple: take the cross, fight for God, and you'll be rewarded. Some were promised land, others were promised riches, some were even promised forgiveness of debts. But underneath it all, it was economics at work. Bankers financed the voyages, kings mortgaged their estates, merchants outfitted fleets in exchange for trading privileges. And the church? It preached salvation, but it also balanced the books. Think about the irony. A war for holy lands, funded by taxes, loans, and financial deals. For some, the Crusades were about faith. For others, they were about opportunity. But for everyone involved, they were about money. Behind every holy banner, there was a bill. And in the end, the Crusades didn't just reshape religion. They reshaped the medieval economy itself. Cathedrals. We see them today as monuments of faith. Towering spires, stained glass windows, walls that have stood for centuries. But in the Middle Ages, cathedrals were more than houses of worship. They were economic engines. Think about what it took to build one. Thousands of tons of stone, glass imported from far away, wood, iron, marble, and most importantly, thousands of workers. Masons, carpenters, sculptors, glassmakers. Entire towns were employed for decades. For some cathedrals, the work lasted more than 100 years. Generations laid the stones, one after another, never seeing the finished product. And where did the money come from? Tithes, donations, indulgences, even wealthy patrons who wanted their names tied to God's glory. But here's the fascinating part. Slight pause. Every coin that went into a cathedral spread out into the local economy. Farmers sold more food to feed the workers. Merchants sold more tools, more cloth, more materials. Towns grew richer because the church was building big. In a way, cathedrals were the skyscrapers of their time, a symbol of wealth, a statement of power, a declaration. This city, this faith, this institution is here to stay. And while the faithful saw them as gateways to heaven, the church also knew they were monuments to earthly influence. The higher the spire, the greater the proof of wealth and dominance. So yes, cathedrals were about faith, but they were also about economics. They were investments in power, prestige, and permanence. So what happens when faith and money collide? The answer is simple and messy. Corruption, revolutions, and reform. For centuries, the church preached salvation, but it also collected tithes like a landlord and sold indulgences like a merchant. This double role, spiritual and financial, gave it immense power, but it also made it a target. Indulgences, for example, didn't just fund cathedrals. They sparked outrage. Martin Luther looked at a church that had turned forgiveness into a business, and he rebelled. The result? The Protestant Reformation, one of the biggest religious, political, and economic upheavals in history. Church taxes fueled resentment too. Peasants saw their harvests disappear into church barns. Nobles saw their wealth drained into Rome, and when pressure built too high, it exploded in revolts and revolutions. Still, we can't ignore what religion accomplished with money. It financed art. It financed learning. It financed the construction of cities that still stand today. Faith moved people. But money gave faith its infrastructure. Here's the bigger lesson. Slight pause. Emphasize. An army without pay can't march. A king without credit can't rule. And a church without money can't survive. Religion promised eternal salvation. But in this world, salvation always had a price tag, and that price shaped history. History remembers the saints, the popes, the reformers. Statues honor them. Books praise them. But behind the stories of faith was always the story of money. The Medici built cathedrals. The church sold indulgences. The Crusades marched on loans and taxes. Faith and money always collided, and together they reshaped the world. So next time you see a cathedral or read about a crusade, remember this: salvation wasn't free. It had a price tag. And that price built the world we live in today. If you enjoyed this story and you want to uncover more hidden financial history, don't forget to subscribe to Economic Chronicles, because there's so much more history hidden in the money we use every day.